welcome. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Excellent, excellent. I haven't lost my voice yet. Gray hair hasn't taken it away. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Norman Ajari. I can't tell you the excitement I have when I have to read this young man's work, this young philosopher. It's exciting, it's bold. The work that he does on black dignity and anti-black racism is fundamentally changing the way that people think in the United States and France. Exactly the type of scholar, decolonial worker, an activist / intellectual that we need at a place like the University of Edinburgh. Today he's going to talk about Fanon and black male studies. Black male studies is a newly emergent paradigm that's come about to talk about the experiences and the oppression of racialized men the world over. It started with an investigation to how black men were being oppressed, not only on the basis of racism and white supremacy, but also based on their maleness, eliminated in genocides, sexually exploited, made to penetrate violence. These are all considerations that black male studies is trying to change and challenge ongoing gender paradigms with. So Dr. Ajari is one of the leading scholars in the world in this newly emergent field. So I would like you to join me in welcoming for his talk on Fanon and black male.
Well, thank you very much, Tommy, for this extremely generous introduction. I will sit if you do not see any problem with that. I know I'm losing some charisma points here, but I have a text, so maybe it's going to be easier. So, Frantz Fanon's Peau noire, masque blanc is not an easy reading. Fanon accumulates strange metaphors, resorts to cryptic creolisms or technical vocabulary for a very vast array of disciplines, biological science, from biological sciences to the humanities. He cites and discusses philosophers, novelists, poets. Like many Africana philosophers, he is committed to express the radicality of his thought by any intellectual means necessary. But even when his words are adamant and straightforward, we've not always been able to decipher their meaning. Acting as the typical Parisiast, Fanon writes in the introduction of the book the following: running the risk of angering my black brothers. Running the risk of angering my black brothers, I shall say that the black is not a man. Despite Fanon's explicit call to fraternity, this sentence has often been... Sorry? Okay. Despite Fanon's explicit call to fraternity, this sentence has often been interpreted resorting to abstract humanism. There has been a will not to admit the obvious, that from the very beginning of the book, Fanon's message is unequivocally addressed to black men. And the bad news he brings them is that they are neither human or males, as those are the two meanings the concept took throughout modernity. Writing this, he is convinced that he goes against the grain and contradicts most of black males' intuitions and beliefs, revealing a misplaced narcissism. In other words, he aims at undermining black men's illusionary confidence in their own manhood and humanity. This is why I argue that Fanon did not only conceive Black Skins, White Masks as a book on race relations writ large, but also as an investigation of black dehumanized masculinity. This idea is not taken for granted. When Fanon's focus on black males has been underlined, it was often under the guise of accusations of misogyny built upon the assumption that racialized masculinity was not a legitimate theoretical topic of investigation. Following Richard, Judith Butler has diagnosed a pervasive masculinism at the heart of Fanon's revolutionary political thought. In order to mitigate the condemnation, she theorizes here his description of anti-colonial masculinity as a compensatory motivation. Precocious lines of thought, as evidenced in Butler or Teedin and Sharpley Whiting, exemplify how the only viable option to contradict the delegitimizing of Fanon's account on gender have been to magnanimously prove that his discreet but inflexible commitment to women's liberation as a radical humanist, as well as his usefulness to anti-racist feminist liberation theory and practice, temper his heterosexism and latent homophobia. But those dismissals, conditional acceptances, or careful rehabilitations all share the same assumptive logic predicated upon the idea that Fanon's focus on black and other colonized males is in itself suspicious and is paired with an acceptable chauvinism. It is seen as a flaw in his thought which cannot have any positive value. It has to be compensated for, but neither accepted nor embraced. Tommy Carey's analysis of the treatment of black manhood in contemporary theoretical discourse has casted doubt on the supposed obviousness of the illegitimacy of any theoretical focus on racialized males. While other subjects have been offered the ability to speak individually as members of oppressed or marginalized groups, black men are censored, told that any mention of their oppression, vulnerability, or death is patriarchal because it inappropriately centers their experience of a woman's oppression writ large, and thereby not worthy of mere intellectual concern or research. End quote. In contradiction with such predominantly negative approach toward Fanon's conceptualization of manhood, Kalpana Seshiri Crooks has argued that we should acknowledge Fanon's masculinism and contextualize it historically as a strategy that arises from his analysis of the nature of colonialism and resistance to it. Despite the interpretative charity she displays, Seshiri Crooks assimilating Fanon's analysis to masculinism is questionable. Suffixism defines it as a prescriptive discourse. But is any discourse on black manhood that resists to simply condemn or vilify its subject inherently masculinist? Cannot it be descriptive rather than prescriptive? Instead of integrating him with vague thought, inglorious vaguely thought masculinist project, maybe should we see Fanon as a precursor of black male studies, which Carey describes as follows. Black male studies refuses the pathologization of black men and boys, a theoretical advance, and proposes the empirically informed account of black male life, its indisputable value, as the basis to condemn and object to black male death. In other words, it is possible to read Fanon's focus on men and boys neither as a blind spot nor as a male-centered militant strategy, but rather as an acknowledgement of the specific racist misandry instituted by colonial powers. Following this line of thought, my paper is an attempt to provide a philologically accurate account of Fanon theorizing of colonized males facing white desire. Doing so, I aim at showing both how his writing paved the way to the emerging field of contemporary black male studies and how psychoanalytical, philosophical, and political insights he offers are still apt to enrich our understanding of racialized men and boys today. I will begin by focusing on the specificity and originality of Fanon's interpretation of patriarchy, not only in Black Skin, White Masks, but also in his second book, A Dying Colonialism. Although the first book focuses on the black diaspora and the second on that of colonized North Africans, I hope to show the coherence of Fanon's analysis and definition of patriarchy. Second, I am going to insist on Fanon's original interpretation of the notion of libidinal economy. In psychoanalytic theory, libidinal economy deals with the collective organizing of desire, preferred object of lust and disgust, and the reason for such investments. Fanon is part of a school of thought named institutional psychotherapy, according to whom there is no radical split between private desires and collective public action. The question of the resemblance or unity of social and desiring investments is usually raised through a Freudo-Marxist paradigm that presupposes that social oppression works suppressing desire. Let us, for instance, think of Herbert Marcuse's notion of civilization as surplus repression, Felix Guattari's idea that capitalism generates a great divide between political and libidinal economy, or Bernard Stiegler's thesis that cognitive economy turns our capacity to sustain long-term desiring investments into self-destructive pulsion. Beyond their obvious differences, all those theories share the same assumption that desire is inherently good and empowering, and that violence comes from its social tethering or smothering. On the other hand, Fanon's analysis of racial and colonial desire breaks with this tradition, demonstrating the pervasiveness, intensity, and exuberance of multiple forms of desire encouraged by imperialism. Both the colonizers and the colonized are vehicles of a great amount of libidinal investments, predominantly oriented towards appropriation, extermination, or self-annihilation. One of Fanon's most central tasks consisted in identifying and attempting to reorient those pathological forms of desire. Since Sigmund Freud, family has been theorized as the place where human desire is shaped. Following this line, Black Skin, White Masks provides a sketchy yet coherent definition of the patriarchal European family. Fanon firstly describes patriarchy as a pathogenic structure. The patriarchal European family, with its flaws, failings, and vices, in close contact with the society we know, produces about 30% of neurotics, Fanon says. In other words, people within the European patriarchal family suffer from mental health disorder, but Fanon pushes the description further, relating the anthropological and psychological discussion on family with the specific context of a European white colonial nation state. He writes, "In Europe, the family represents the way the world reveals itself to the child. The family structure and the national structure are closely connected. Militarization and a centralized authority in a country automatically result in a resurgence of the father's authority. In Europe, and in every so-called civilized or civilizing country, the family represents a piece of the nation. The child leaving the family environment finds the same laws, the same principles, and the same values. A normal child brought by a normal family will become a normal adult." At first glance, the insistence on the European family's normality may appear to contradict the statement on the neurotic effects of patriarchy. Fanon insists on the overwhelming importance of family in the shaping of the children's worldview as specific to the European family structure. He underlies the normative dimension of this notion of normal, referring in a footnote to the French physician and philosopher Georges Canguilhem's influential book, The Normal and the Pathological, whose one of the most famous statements is that disease is a positive, innovative experience in the living being and not just a fact of decrease or increase. The content of the pathological state cannot be deduced, save for a difference in format, from the content of health. Disease is not a variation of the dimension of health, it is a new dimension of life. In other words, according to Fanon's Canguilhem-inspired framework, there is no contradiction between European families' proclivities to neurosis and its functional normality, since here normality does not relate to some untouched and pure primitive state of the mind or body, but to a normative potential. That is to say, it terms a capacity to create and enforce norms through concrete actions. And it does not only concern one sole individual, but the whole community. What is at stake in the specific case of the white European patriarchal family is the shaping of an entire society according to the norms of the racial polity patriarchal family contributes to shape, maintain, and strengthen. Fanon disrupts the difference between the normal and the pathological white family in a colonial context. From the point of view of a psychiatrist, and especially a black psychiatrist, white patriarchy produces a massive number of neurotics, that is to say, people who experience their own existences as effectively diminished. But from a social and political point of view, those neuroses are integral to the shaping of white polities and colonial rules. The genuine morbidity of the familial assemblage comes from its continuity with the colonial nation. It is a pole of the imperial nation state whose both normality and pathology undistinguishedly concur to the reign of white supremacy and anti-blackness. In summary, according to Fanon, patriarchy does not relate either to individual entitlement or collective behavior. It rests upon how the European state, the white family, and their relation have historically been instituted. Drawing from Fanon's definition, one can identify three main dimensions to patriarchy. First, the father administrates the family the same way a statesman would administrate a nation. Second, the family is meant to serve the state, reproducing subjects conforming its requirements. And third, it is saturated with racial fantasies and stereotypes that are integral to how national belonging, good health, and morality are defined in the imperial context. As a consequence of the assumption of those three elements, we must conclude that belonging to the dominant racial group is a necessary condition of the patriarchal family. There is no patriarchy without the sovereign power of the sovereign power the nation state delegates to the white father. Fanon developed those theories in Black Skin, White Mask, building upon the observation of differences between the Black Caribbean family and the white European one. He then applied the framework to other sites of racial violence and colonial subjugation, such as North Africa. Interestingly enough, even when he describes the most traditional aspects of Algerian cultural habits and family structure, Fanon never refers to the role of the father in terms of patriarchy, resorting preferably to periphrases such as the absolute respect due to the father or the old stultifying attachment to the father. This is not so because the concept of patriarchy is absent from Fanon's lexicon. He uses it in Black Skin, White Masks, but in a dying colonialism as well, in a strict and rigorous way. The phrases Fanon uses to describe the Algerian father refer to a very specific family type we should not mistake for patriarchy. Fanon remarked how the description of the colonized society as a retrograde and ferocious patriarchy became pervasive in colonial Islamologists and social scientist discourses in the conjuncture. The politicians who discuss the fate of North Africa in the French National Assembly in Paris use the criticism of North African alleged patriarchal traditions as a means to legitimize their country's civilizing mission. In sum, it functioned as a misleading racist trope rather than as a neutral descriptive tool. However, Fanon does not idealize the social role Algerian traditionalism allows for women and girls. He's mindful of females being defined as perpetual minors who are meant to stay under the guardianship of a male member of their family, underlying that as in all societies in which work Oh, it's not. We're not here yet, but it's okay. In all yes, that's it. In all societies in which work on the land represents the main source of the means of subsistence, the male, who is the privileged producer, enjoys an almost lordly status. But this specific form of inequality does not fall under the category of patriarchy, as there is no harmony between Algerian customs and the state. On the one hand, colonial law enforced some aspects of Algerian traditionalism, assigning North Africans to a Eurocentric view on their own culture. Colonialism has offered, colonialism has often strengthened or established its domination by an organized petrification of the peasantry, regimented by marabouts, witch doctors, and traditional chiefs. The rural masses still live in a feudal state whose overbearingly medieval structure is nurtured by the colonial administrators and army. Fanon writes in the Wretched of the Earth. But on the other hand, a fantasy of assimilation continuously haunted French colonialism, entrapping the colonized in a perpetual double bind. They were at the same time asked to conform to the traditions colonialism petrified and to assimilate to European modernity. In this context, French progressivism functioned as a mode of legitimation for racist interventions. The stereotype of a jealous and abusive dominion of colonized males over brown women and girls defined dominant views on North African masculinity. It mirrored the representation of Muslim women as a powerless, oppressed group that awaits to be saved from the endemic violence of men of their own ethnicity. This narrative turned French white feminists into both philanthropists and heroes of the colonial cause. But according to Fanon, a closer look at the inner workings of Algerian family shows that behind the visible manifest patriarchy, the more significant existence of a basic matriarchy is affirmed. Analyzing the Algerian colonial situation, Fanon maintains his definition of patriarchy as a fundamental property of the white family that has no equivalent in the subaltern groups. In addition, Fanon's description of colonial attack on the Algerian family structure shows the absence of any gendered solidarity between French soldiers and brown males in North Africa. Quite the opposite. Men are the main targets of the unbridled violence of counterinsurgency tactics. Fanon writes, the struggle for national liberation and the more and more total character of repression have inflicted grave traumatisms upon the family group. A father taken into custody in the street of the company of his children, stripped along with them, torture before their eyes. The sharply experienced brotherhood of men with bare, bruised, bloody shoulders, a husband arrested, dragged away, imprisoned. The women are then left to find ways of keeping the children from starving to death. Those remarks are corroborated by contemporary literature on gendercide, according to whom the gender-selective mass killing and disappearance of males, especially battle-age males, remains a pervasive feature of contemporary conflict. North African men are specifically victimized and their ordeal is turned into a morbid spectacle aimed at terrorizing the whole family, if not the whole colony. In sum, Fanon's material psychoanalytic interpretation preceded and anticipated on Tommy Curry's redefinition of patriarchy. Patriarchy, a system of white male domination, uses racism, militarism, and sexual violence to subjugate the multiple others created as degradation of Western man, has been made possible only through the particular colonial violence and neo-colonial economies of white nations and white supremacism. Along those multiple economies, Fanon particularly insisted on libidinal economy, underlying that white people's ordinary apprehension of themselves is always predicated upon racial fantasies that define colonial practices as such. If, according to Fanon, the patriarchal European family is a branch of the white supremacist state where colonial desire is shaped, produced, and consolidated, the next question one relates to the nature, manifestations, and functioning of such desire. Fanon's originality regarding traditional use of the unconscious in critical theory is that instead of insisting on the repressive role of the superego, he showed how patriarchy encourages racially charged, untethered, unbridled desires. Venereal lust targeting black bodies is not threatened by repression, but is free to proliferate in both culture and society. Black studies scholar Jared Sexton insisted on the paradoxical anti-black drive, which does not seek to destroy its object, its aim being to preserve its object in perpetuity, but is also immensely appropriative and tends to brutalize it in a rather excessive fashion. This interpretation offers us an additional clue to understand the brutalization of racialized males Fanon described during the Algerian War, beyond the sole functional justification of targeting the father as a pivotal figure of the traditional family. The Black British philosopher David Marriott describes Fanon as a thinker of what he calls racial fetishism. Here, the fetish acts as a defense against more intolerable forms of anxiety while allowing subjects to enjoy this fear more or less secretly, more or less violently. Fetishization, in other words, functions as a way of overcoming racial fears and anxieties about something that cannot clearly be represented. According to Marriott, the process of fetishization of racialized males is a way of representing such a fear under the form of something that would be both enjoyable and disposable. Beyond its obvious political function, the capture, torture, and assassination of Algerian fathers Fanon describes has a profound libidinal value. It is not surprising that an intense level of violence has been enshrined and normalized in colonial law long before the need of specific counterinsurgency measures. This constitutes a clear continuity between colonialism and anti-blackness. In Calvin Warren's term, the law conceals an ontological project that divides the world between things and subjects, between properties and those who are in position of enjoying property. The interweaving of negrophobia and negrophilia is at the core of black skin, white masks argument. In our view, Fanon says, an individual who loves blacks is as sick as someone who abhors them. The notion of pathological colonial love immediately conjures up images of colonial soldiery systematically raping native women. In a very sarcastic note, Fanon writes, when a soldier from the conquering troops slept with a young Malagasy girl, there was probably no respect for alterity on his part. But the same note also raises a more uncommon question. What does sexual violence targeting black males in colonial context stay unaddressed? Because relations between a white woman and a black man automatically become a romantic affair. It is a gift, not a rape, Fanon answers. Black males are not viewed as relational beings, but as brutes and rapists. In other words, they embody a pure destructive force that is meant to be contained, punished, and brutalized by the law. As a consequence, if a relationship occurs, it is believed to be solely due to the white woman's selflessness. In this context, it is an honor to be the daughter of a white woman, Fanon adds. As a gender, white womanhood belongs to the register of morality. But as social anthropology taught us, a gift implies a counter-gift, and there is no honor beyond the constant risk of dishonor. Said otherwise, the relation between the white woman and the black male entraps him in a precarious situation of ontological debt. In a way, the white woman's fragile appreciation of the black man is the only thing that anchors him in humanity or even in life itself. The specific desire white people express for the black male body is pivotal in understanding how colonial libidinal economy works. Fanon writes, all the negrophobic women we met had abnormal sexual lives. All of them bestowed on the black man powers that others such as husbands or occasional lovers did not possess. And then there occurs an element of perversity, a surviving element of infantile structure. God only knows how they must make love. It must be terrifying. There is one expression that with time has become particularly eroticized: the black athlete. One woman confirmed in us that the very thought made her heart skip a beat. Let us not rush to the easier individualizing conclusion that negrophobia would be a side effect for these women's troubled or unsatisfying sexual lives. In fact, it may very well be the other way around. I argue that it is more accurate to say that black maleness is how abnormality, crisis, and extreme perversity are coded and expressed within the white libidinal economy. Anti-black racism contaminates it as a whole, parasitizing at various degrees of intensity every sexual intercourse. Indeed, the phantasmatic of black masculinity is intrinsically linked to the place white masculinity and the possibility, impossible to totally prevent and impossible to accept and admit, the possibility of its deficiency. The black penis exists as an external consolation designed to ease the pain of the white patriarch structure deficiency. Thanks to the compensatory pleasure it is supposed to provide, the Negro member renders the morbid event of the white man's fallibility insignificant. Obsessed by the jouissive horror aroused by the black male sexuality, which occupies all symbolic space, the white woman no longer has an eye for the gaping fissure of white masculinity. Commenting on the so-called serious journalist Michel Cournot, Fanon notes that the black man has been occulted. The black man has been occulted. He has been turned into a penis. He is a penis. We can easily imagine what such descriptions can arouse in a young woman from Lyon. Why Lyon? He was living there. I don't think it's something special about Lyon women. But, a young woman from Lyon. Horror, desire, not indifference in any case. Describing contemporary Caribbean context, French psychoanalyst Charles Melman confirms Fanon's diagnosis of fantasized black male figure balancing between nothingness and phallic overpresence. If I am dependent upon a language of mastery that refuses to acknowledge my humanity, either it is going to deny me as a sexual being, or it is going to assign me a pan-sex character, being sex only, constantly thinking of it. The neurotic harmony of the white patriarchal family is constantly worked at its core by the excessive fantasies generated by black manhood, but which help to maintain its equilibrium as soon as trouble and damage occur. Fanon's controversial remarks in Peau Noire Masque Blanc about the unconscious desire of negrophobic white women for racial rape should be interpreted in this light. According to Fanon, white women's overflowing with negrophilia relates to a lack of objectal investment, that is to say, loving, longing, and caring for someone else. That is to say that black males who do not qualify as legitimate objects of affection are still apt to fill the void. And they are so appropriate to the function that it creates a tempting illusion that the void is somehow more satisfying and provides more enjoyment than any actual object, that is to say, any actual white man. Fanon describes here a sort of splenetic dissatisfaction at the heart of modern sexual life. It is not what Lacan famously labeled as plus de jouir, or surplus enjoyment, but rather an insatiable quest for jouir de plus, a horizon in which the partner's cock is never big enough and the sexual act never intense enough. Objectal investment becomes irrelevant since only intensity matters. The Negro stands here for the paradigmatic figure of pure satisfaction, free of any investment. Either because in a world shaped by white supremacy, the white woman holds the power to dismiss the black man at any time, or because the black male is reduced to a penile function in a negrophobic libidinal economy, blackness appears as a pure coefficient of enjoyment. As a conclusion, according to Fanon, patriarchy is the institution that links the colonial, imperial, and racist state to the family unit. It is the institution by which the nation state reproduces subjects fit to serve it. Within its internal economy, stereotypes of colonized males play a decisive role. On the one hand, they are portrayed as a threat to the coherence and maintenance of the family, and are therefore overexposed to the violence of repression. But on the other hand, as subjects of venereal fantasies and lust, black men also serve as compensatory objects. Suspended on the supposed but empirically unattainable infallibility of the white man, the patriarchal order is irremediably fragile. Yet, the caricature of black men, whether negrophobic or negrophilic, serves to render the flaws, wrongs, and failures of white patriarchy illegible. Instead, they are attributed to that monstrous hyperbole that is black manhood, disproportionate in its received potential as well as in its supposed violence. Tommy Curry has described this process, coining the neologism phallicism. Phallicism refers to the condition by which males of a subordinated, racialized, or ethnicized group are simultaneously imagined to be sexual threats and predatory, and libidinally constituted as sexually desirous by the fantasies or fetishes of the dominant racial group. This concept is meant to guide a seemingly inexplicable tension, if not contradiction, between the description of racialized males under repressive and murderous regimes and the hypersexualization as objects of desire, possession, and want. Thus, the operation of phallicism is the unspeakable evils of masculinity held to be authentic white masculinity are projected upon its disproportionate double, almost beyond all symbolization, the Negro penis. Thank you for your attention.